Engaging with nature. Engaging with nature. I was at first very excited to read this chapter because I like engaging with nature, or I like to think about it. Is it that time already? 8:55. There you go. All right. I was excited for this, but I guess as I was reading through it, I became, I don't know, a little bit disappointed in the sense that I feel like this is a huge issue. These are like huge issues that are confronting us, but then it went way off into all these different directions. And I think that there's a central tension, I believe, in anthropology between the interesting and the important. And because anthropologists study in all these different places and all these different peoples and all these different times and all of humanity, we can kind of accumulate sometimes a lot of different examples. And, you know, I could probably spend the whole class talking to you about, well, we will talk about things like, you know, pigs and wolves and bullfights and all those things. I could spend the whole time talking about all these things, and I've sat through whole anthropology classes where somebody just explained the kinship of some group and went on and on and on about the kinship. But sometimes you have to pause and think, wait a second, you know, what is the importance of this? Why do we want to know this stuff? I mean, I think that there's something to be said for simply the hook of pure interest, the hook of just fascination with the lives of ourselves and the lives of others. But at some point, I think that you have to ask a question, which is, so what, right? Where are we going here? What is this doing? Why should we be doing this? And I think that's a question that I often find myself asking, not just in anthropology, but in other things, like actually a lot of different classes. History, for example, it'll be sitting there and accumulating facts and knowledge. And sometimes you have to think, well, you know, so what? What difference does it make? And so there are two people that I've turned the most to in anthropology for kind of the so what question. One is my mentor, who I've talked about before, Michel Rolfe-Trouillot, who actually was the one who introduced me to this question, or the so what question. Or I don't want to call it the why question, because some of the ultimate whys are impossible to answer, but the so what question, I think, can be answered. And Trouillot wrote a phrase which I like, which is that anthropology will only matter if it evokes a purpose outside of itself. That is to say, it has to speak to something beyond simply the study of, whatever we're doing here in this classroom. And I think as I read through your papers, that's one of the things that I kind of wanted to know a little bit, is a little bit more of the so what. And I realized that when you're writing papers, you're like, you know, the only reason you probably are writing a paper is because somebody asked you to write a paper. And there's plenty of things in classrooms that you have to do because you have to do, and you're just, you know, you're just doing them. But to the extent that you can link that to something beyond whatever it is the professor wants you to do, and to the extent to which you can put that into your own life and think about, you know, the world or whatever it is you want to think about, you will be happier, even if it doesn't necessarily translate into all the little tiny rewards that we give out in academia. If you can somehow try to link this up. Now, I realize that my idea of so what might not be the same as your idea of so what, and I don't want to be so, how to say, so critical that, you know, some people so what is that none of this matters, and you know, we're all going to die anyway, so who cares? I'm not at that level of the so what. I just want to know kind of what do we do with this, or where does this get us to? So that's one of the people I turn to. And the second person that I turn to a lot for the so what is an anthropologist named Tim Ingold. I've made some of you in an intro to anthropology read a little book that he wrote recently called Anthropology, Why It Matters. And so I was happy to see in here that we had a little bit, kind of, I think, a summary statement of probably this book in only 2 pages, which is always nice. Maybe even only 1 page because it spans from page 183 to page 184. Kind of, I think, encapsulating what might be a so what to this, or what might be going on here. So I guess let's see, who do I want to start with? Let's start with Leah. What do you think is the, what's going on out there that we might want to be paying attention to these days, I guess is what I'd ask. Yeah. I'll get to the pigs later, don't worry.
Okay. Well, I focused on like the part at the bottom of page 183, 163, that said that most people like don't realize that essentially most of this stuff is happening because of like big businesses and other things. It's realistically out of our hands for a lot of stuff. You can do certain things to help like the environment, but it's really like the big businesses, and he said a specific word that I can't remember. Like yeah, but essentially that
We're thinking about the extractive industry and militarization. Extractive industry and militarization, right? And so I think that to just sort of back up a little bit, when you say all this stuff is happening, right? I think Ingold's talking about what he calls, you know, the possible imminent collapse of environmental systems, that they're going to fall down. And you, as with other people, flag this, that, you know, we're sort of, in some ways, we're all in this together, but we're not. It's not like everybody played the same part in getting us to the point we are. That people are not all equally responsible, and some people or some systems bear more to blame than others. So, you know, I mean, that's kind of a huge thing. So where does I guess I would then say, where does anthropology come into this? Haley, what do you think? What can anthropology do in this situation?
I mean, he says that anthropology itself is committed to taking others seriously, and I think that was where that stood out to me, because it's a subject that examines not just like one culture or one way of thinking. And it kind of takes parts of like all different types of like subjects and, you know, studies to sort of form ideas and concepts to sort of help us in the future. And so I said that it, you know, it's a subject that provides us with answers to some of the tougher questions and concepts in life. You know, and so he is talking about the climate crisis, how anthropology examines other cultures and how other people work differently than we do in Western cultures, how we see the climate crisis and how we should approach it maybe differently from, you know, indigenous cultures that actually live, you know, by the ocean and, you know, live that life every day. They might have answers we don't necessarily know.
All right, excellent. Yes. So that, you know, that anthropology, as people who have gone out and tried to live with, understand people, that we might be able to take that stuff, and it's not to say, he's not saying that other people have all the answers and the West is screwed up. He says that we need science, we need the perspectives of other people, but we might be able to figure out some other possibilities if we took others seriously, if we took these other perspectives seriously. Now, there was some debate in the comments section, which was interesting. I couldn't get you to debate each other. You didn't seem to be necessarily debating each other, but one student who is not here was kind of probably because this got so depressing, said something to the effect of, well, sure, anthropology can do this, but what difference does it make? The capitalists are going to do whatever the hell they want anyway. Which I think, Gabe, did you kind of say this too? I couldn't figure out what you were saying, because at the end you said, why does Ingold think the capitalists will listen? True. Yeah. Which is basically that, right? Why? It's not going to matter because why would they listen anyway? But then at the beginning you said something different about the capitalists, which kind of intrigued me.
The last part was about why would capitalists listen to anthropologists?
Right.
And the people anthropologists.
Sure, yeah.
And then the beginning part was that capitalism is like this weird amorphous blob monster.
Right.
That'll just like, it got us into the problem and it'll probably get us out of the problem in some weird way.
So you have a kind of weird hope that capitalism is going to get us out. I guess if it's a blob monster, it can. Yeah, I guess I wasn't. I was intrigued by that. I couldn't be convinced by that just because it seems like capitalism is very good at going into a place, making a bunch of profit, and then pulling out and not giving a damn about the rest of the place. So it seems like if capitalism can sort of sell us enough of these things and keep us kind of happy with Indian food and good stuff and, a little bit of stuff in certain places and keep the fog rolling in, and as long as they can insulate themselves in their little places, they'll be fine. And the rest of us can.
Believe. It's entirely like nature is based off of self-preservation.
Right.
And if this is the only planet we can have it, at some point, there has to be.
They're gonna run out.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're gonna have to fix it. Yeah, I mean, if you read the first few pages of the Communist Manifesto, it's like Marx is way into how amazing capitalism is, actually. It's kind of over the top. And so I think that, there is something to be said for, okay, here's this thing that has created all this stuff. Maybe that's our way out too. So actually, now I think I see what's going on there. You might be right. However, Lexi's going to tell us something different about this. Lexi, what's the problem here, or what did you find out about different societies and the power differential?
So I started looking online. I was more wondering about how different people with different lifestyles view the environment. So there's this study done in 2001 that found that countries with a lower power distance were more likely to prioritize protection of the environment over economic growth. And I don't know, I feel like I see that a lot with people at a higher power, like they care less. Not all of them, but I noticed that people with that security care less about the environment because they have money and power, and I don't know how to explain it.
Because they can insulate themselves from the effects of this. So, I mean, I think that one of the problems we get into, we talked about this when we were talking about capitalism, is because capitalism is this, as Gabe put it, an amorphous, did you say? An amorphous blob monster. I mean, it's very ill-defined, and people are always talking about it without defining what it is. I guess I would say that there are different kinds of capitalisms, right? And there's the sort of capitalism that makes things so that things are enormously unequal, and so that certain people can wall themselves off from the consequences of things and not give a damn. But there are also capitalisms that have, kind of even things out, and so that people can still have that all in the same boat, or the sense of sharing the planet, or sharing at least a community enough that they can plunge their way through. So I guess I would say if we are going to, if our enemy is an amorphous blob monster named capitalism, we'll probably never get anywhere. But if we can find those little areas in which maybe we can reduce inequalities a little bit to have people more in the same boat. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe taking other people seriously and talking to people who are in these places where there's land and oceans and things will help us out. So I'm going to be, I'll be still optimistic now. I'll still be in my optimistic sense. So let's talk about a couple, I want to talk about a few places or a few different kinds of systems that anthropologists have studied and are as Ingold says, the people that are closer to the land and oceans and animals and those things. So one of the things that anthropologists study a lot of are foraging societies. Right, Connor? Who are the foragers? Yeah, so I actually prefer, I think for a lot of people use the term foraging as a kind of shorthand. This is, you know, the idea of hunting and gathering. I actually prefer the term gathering and hunting because when it turns out a lot of these societies get most of their calories from the gathering part of things and what the women in general do and not from all the hunting. There are actually very few places that get more of their calories from hunting than they do from gathering. And you know, we can go through, there's a whole anthropology class, I think, that Professor Anderson teaches on hunters and gatherers. And the anthropologists are famed for saying that this is the most sustainable environmental system that has ever been produced. It's the way in which human beings spread out all over the world. It's enormously varied and complex and all these things. And, you know, some people have said, well, let me put it to you this way. If I go out there and try telling people, hey, this is a great system, what are those people going to do? I try to tell my parents that we should all be hunter-gatherers. What's going to happen? And you're shaking your head. They're not going to listen, right? No, they'll laugh you right out of town, right? So I think that this is, yes, the most sustainable system, but it's probably the most, I don't want to say this out loud, it's the most ridiculous too, in the sense that we're always, if we try to promote this, we're always going to get stereotyped as these idealists who don't really understand what's going on here. So that's, you know, I mean, I think it's, don't get me wrong, I think it's really important to study with gatherers and hunters, but you have to watch out because people have all kinds of crazy ideas about them. I wanted to talk about pastoralism. Pastoralism is basically another name for herding animals. And, you know, I guess the closest we came to somebody talking about pastoralism, Lee, I promise you could talk about the pigs. Yeah, what did you find out about those pigs? That's not technically pastoralism. You want to have some cows or sheep or things, but, you know. Yeah. Right.
But that was something tribe. I'm sorry, I couldn't look at them for a second like that. But they keep pigs and they do it on this like 10-year cycle. And every 10 years they end up killing like most of their pigs, almost all of them, because it gets kind of out of hand.
Mm-hmm.
But it has, and these pigs were to follow like ancestral traditions. But it's also very beneficial to the land that they're on and to their society as a whole because they go from, they eat the land, but then they can go to a new location, start using that land, become more productive again, stop having all the bad effects of having too many pigs that they couldn't control because they said that they would eat the crop, they would poop everywhere, some other stuff like that. It would just make it harder for them to keep everything together, and then once they move to a new location, the land that they were once using can go back to its natural state, essentially. So it's not only just a tradition, but it's good for the ecology of the land that they're on.
That does sound good. Can we sell this to people? Yeah. No, I mean, it's, I mean, herding or pastoral societies or even pig raising, even what's called slash and burn agriculture or horticulture has been sustainable and very successful in different parts of the world. I think like hunting and gathering, though, we're going to get dismissed by this. So interesting, but I'm not sure it's going to, I'm not going to be able to sell this to my people. Horticulture. This one I thought, I can sell this. Or Aaron, you can sell this to me, right? What's horticulture?
Horticulture is mostly like
Mm-hmm.
but they do also have like some smaller livestock.
Mm-hmm.
Horticulture, they describe it in the book as a small scale, low intensity method, instead of full scale agriculture that we have. They give it something a little bit more low key to keep the environment happy and healthy, I guess.
Yeah, I felt like this was, horticulture. I mean, you could just say it's sort of like small scale gardening. It's often combined with other things, some animals and things. I felt like this was sellable. Like, I feel like people can relate to this, like that we could all grow like little tomatoes and, people want to do that anyway. So, creating more community garden spaces, it seemed like to me something that we could sell as sort of small scale change that we can enact that would bring people into touch with nature without having these ideas that we're going to go back to being hunters and gatherers, which we just get laughed at about. So I found, so Aaron gave us a link to I think it was an Encyclopedia Britannica article, and I went to the link, and I guess it was a good link, and what they said was good. But I guess I would ask you to look at how they talk about it. So horticultural societies. This is in the Encyclopedia Britannica, Britannica.com, I think. Primitive agriculture is called horticulture by anthropologists rather than farming because it is carried on like simple gardening, supplementary to hunting and gathering. It differs from farming also in its relatively more primitive technology. And I guess what I'm trying to emphasize here is that, the thing is that in order to take others seriously, it's kind of like what you were saying with the terminology, right? If we're going to call this primitive all the time, then people are going to think there's this other thing that's much more sophisticated called, the technology of intensive agriculture, or, intensive farming, which is one of the reasons we're in the mess that we are in. And so we have to kind of, in some ways, adjust. I mean, that's why it is so important to not talk about people as necessarily being primitive, because in some ways that gives the sense that we're all on this kind of scale. So we might be able to sell this. We're going to have to adjust the terminology a little bit, but it's a good kind of method, or it's a good way in which to farm. Many, many, many of you were drawn to this section of the anthropocentric views of animals. I don't know why. Michelle, why? Why was this so exciting?
Well, when I was younger, it was just for like services and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I always just thought it was weird, like, why is that a thing? I didn't realize like how many people thought like how entertaining it was to watch. So I thought that was pretty interesting because I related to it so much.
So this is personally relevant. Actually, Haley, you too, personally relevant. You've been here.
Yeah, I lived in Montana for a couple of months before COVID. And
Right.
yeah, before COVID.
That must not be that fun running the bulls during COVID. No, right.
I mean,
Yeah.
actually, I don't know.
Well, I mean, it could be fun. It could be equally
It
fun.
probably
Yeah.
is, honestly,
Right.
it probably is, but
Right.
it's like, and it's in the same part of the culture there. Pamplona itself is a very like, cultural city, it's very small,
Uh-huh.
but they have, yeah, the running of the bulls, which is like highly, it's like world renowned, you know, and it happens once a year, but it becomes like a part of their, literally, like every part of their culture. So in class, I would learn about it, part of the curriculum.
It's part of the curriculum. Wow, they're really going for that.
And they teach you about it in class and like the significance of it, but then they also make you aware of, you know, the extreme dangers. And so, you know, they do the running of bulls, they release like a group of bulls in the streets, in very narrow streets, which are like the side of these hallways in this building.
Mm-hmm.
And cobblestone, and people take their white t-shirts and paint them in red. Bulls are blind though, they don't actually see the color red, they just see you waving something.
Aha.
But see these people, but they release these bulls which they rile up, and they like, you know, hit them and they electrocute them and whatever in a big group, in a big like cage, and then we finally release them to the streets, and so the bulls think they're really like free, and then they basically corral them and direct them into the bull ring, and people are trampled and killed and injured and maimed, and everybody's screaming from the windows and like the balconies at everyone, and people are literally just like on the ground bleeding. The bulls eventually get to the bull ring, they're in there, they do a bullfight, and then afterwards they kill all the bulls. So the bulls are really just raised to do this one thing, and like they're treated horribly the entire time. And then they go and do a bullfight, and then they're just killed off. Because they deserve their hurt.
Huh. Well, that was interesting. Whoa. I don't know what to say.
It's like, honestly, it's like, and so they teach you about this in class, and they show us videos. They show you videos of the actual running of the bulls, and people being trampled and killed.
Yeah, some people die too. So
No,
there's
no,
that.
people
Yeah.
die.
Right. It's not just the bulls.
No.
No.
People die and get really hurt.
Right.
But the whole point of it is that the men, it's mostly men too, that are in the streets actually running with the bulls.
Aha. Yeah. This does talk a lot about the masculinity aspect of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's like a big thing of that is, you know, that it's like a heroic thing to do, it's brave, and but as like time goes on, they do say that, you know, less and less people actually enjoy it, and it's kind of stupid. So I think that as like the world evolves, so there's things that they're doing that definitely changing, but it's still an extreme part of their culture.
Yeah, I mean, it's striking, especially, you know, as we're in this sort of Columbus Day, Indigenous Peoples Day thing, you know, it is striking some of these kind of separations and masculinity associations that have been made and that are kind of specific to areas of the world in which, you know, this is seen as dominating over nature and leading to specific interesting outcomes. Liz, you looked up this person and this anthropologist, and he's done something else besides this, I think. Wolves?
Yeah, he studied the wolf and human interaction. Humans before thought that wolves were just ferocious, preying on the innocent, which led to their almost extinction to colonial. Now that I'm thinking of it, I remember in one of my classes that there used to be wolves here in New York, but they were killed to extinction.
Did we get rid of the wolves? We probably did. I mean, we almost extinguished all the wolves. And then in certain places, they brought them back because wolves turn out to be great. They're very important. They're like the apex predator in certain places. But now there's like they're hunting them again in certain states. So this is actually a fairly live political issue right now because they're trying to get them listed again as threatened because in some places they love hunting them, you know, in part because they're always.
Yeah, well, I think also why people who hate them are farmers, because I watched a documentary on the reestablished wolves in Yellowstone.
Right.
Even though it ended up changing the whole environment, farmers that are around Yellowstone didn't like it because now their livestock stuff being targeted and killed a lot.
Yeah, no, I don't want to be down on the farmers either, poor farmers, but maybe they need to go back to horticulture and buffalo instead, because, you know, there you can only have, wolves cannot kill all the buffalo, I'll tell you that. Huh, Annie, pigeons. Pigeon, what were they doing?
They on Labor Day will have a huge pigeon thing where they'll release thousands of pigeons, not at a time, but like in series, and people take turns like hunting them, like shooting them out of the air. I don't really know why, but it was outlawed eventually.
Eventually, they stopped shooting all those pigeons. Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of these examples are examples of how in what we might call Western societies, we tend to consign non-human animals into a world that we want to believe that we have mastery over them, and so we have to shoot them or kill them. And, you know, there's these interesting moments of reversal, right? So they are allowed to trample a few of us every so often. But in general, you want them, you know, kind of under control and subdued, and you don't want them taking your sheep, so you have to kill all the wolves. And the only animals that we take as sort of as persons are these are animals that we might have as pets. And then we dress them up and we sort of give them little names, and we lock those animals into this kind of perpetual childhood. So, you know, I mean, it's an interesting, I mean, it's a way of approaching the world of human and non-human animals, which probably contributed to some of the problems that we're facing these days. I wanted to give you because so many of you are into this, right before that, there's a very famous sentence, maybe one of the most famous sentences within anthropology by Claude Lévi-Strauss, who's perhaps the most famous anthropologist in the Francophone countries in France, pretty famous here too, but who said that animals are good to think with. And, you know, I think what he was talking about is that we can, that societies use non-human animals in different ways, in their mythologies, in their analogies, in their metaphors, you know, and even in our own lives, you can think about the names that we call other people and how they're related to animal terminologies. And that tells us a lot about what's going on in that society. And you know, I remember when I was doing my own field work, and I wrote a letter to Sidney Mintz, who I talked to you about you know what was going on there, and he sent me back this letter, which, you know, he was talking about the animals that people were taking care of, and one of the questions he asked was, you know, do they think that animals can sin? Can they you know, can they sin? Can they, in the sense of the religious sense of commit sins? And I'd never thought about that before, but I actually asked them, you know, well. And you know, they were very, the people that I was talking to were very interesting. Certain animals, of course, couldn't commit sins like rabbits and guinea pigs and those things that they kept around the house. But other animals could, like dogs and cats, they could go out and do like stupid things, and that was their fault. And so, you know, the way in which we take animals or non-human animals to be in relation to ourselves says a lot about our society and about what we think about ourselves as persons, which is, I think, hopefully a great segue into the next chapter, chapter 7, which we'll read for Thursday, coming up fast, on personhood. So